Good evening and welcome to the June 6, 2018 meeting of the Falmouth Conservation Commission. Before we get started, I'd like to remind everybody that we'd like you to please silence your devices. And also, everybody who's here is welcome to come up and address the commission and the public, but we need you to come to the podium to do that so that you can use the microphone, which is for the benefit of the TV audience. All right, our first order of business tonight is to vote some minutes, starting with May 16th. Has anybody?
I looked at them, I didn't have any issue. I'll move to accept as written.
Thank you.
I'd second that.
All right, any questions or comments? All those in favor of accepting the minutes say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous. Next, May 23rd.
I wasn't here, so I can't speak to it.
No takers on May 23rd. Okay, we're going to have to reschedule that for the next meeting. I don't know. We're not expecting Susan tonight?
No, I believe she told us last week she wasn't going to be here, so we'll just give her the tape.
Okay. May 29th.
Hi, Steve.
Aye.
I wasn't
Do we
there.
need to,
I was only there for half of it.
we're just going to table these?
We've tabled, we're going to table the 23rd.
Yep.
The 29, May 29 minutes, has anyone reviewed those? No, all right.
Move to accept?
Oh,
Second.
okay. All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, unanimous.
Excuse me, Madam Chair.
Yes.
Wait. Nothing. I should have said that quick.
Oh.
That's all.
Okay, that's all right, thank you. All right, unanimous. We'll move on to request for a continuance under a notice of intent. Joan Foster, care of Jack Foster, Lot 11 Chase Road, map 14-15A-002C-011, West Falmouth, Massachusetts, for permission to construct a new single-family two-bedroom house with attached deck, stairs, install vinyl sheeting to a depth of 8 feet to mitigate for trench collapse, nitrogen reduction septic system, dry wells, utilities, gravel driveway, implement an invasive species management and restoration plan, and the associated clearing, excavating, grading, and landscaping. Request for a variance under FWR 10.13 from the performance standards set out in FWR 1018, including FWR 1018-4, 1018-5A1A, 1018-5A3B, 1018-5A3E, and 1018-7E5.
Yes, Madam Chairman, the applicant is requesting a continuance until August 1st.
August 1st.
So moved.
Second?
All right, any questions or comments?
How many continuances?
There have been multiple continuances, Courtney, but they're
in negotiations.
They're in negotiations.
All right, so all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous, so moved. Next request for a continuance, Anthony Cipro, 91 Bywater Court, Falmouth, Massachusetts, for permission to reconfigure the existing driveway and install required mitigation plantings.
Yes, Madam Chairman, the applicant is requesting a continuance until June 13th.
So moved. Second.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous, so moved. Okay, next we have request for determination of applicability, and for the benefit of those who are here and are not usually here, just say that on these requests for determination of applicability, a negative determination is what the applicant would like to have. It means that they do not need to move to the next level of review. What they've submitted is sufficient. First, we have John O'Connell, 26 Shaker Lane, East Falmouth, Massachusetts, for permission to repair a storm-damaged pier.
Yes, Madam Chairman, the staff is recommending a -2 under the state and the bylaw with the resource area boundaries not confirmed.
So moved. Second.
Right. Any questions or comments from the board? Any questions or comments from the public? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous, so moved. 66 Crowell Road, LLC, 1 Starfish Lane, East Falmouth, Massachusetts, for permission to install underground utilities within an existing utility easement at 1 Starfish Lane.
Yes, Madam Chairman, we're recommending a -2 under the state and the bylaw with the resource area boundaries not confirmed.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments from the board, from the public? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous, so moved. Michael and Lynda Connolly, 87 Gunning Point Avenue, Falmouth, Massachusetts, for permission to complete the landscaping, planting, and dry wells that were approved under the order of conditions SE 25-3999.
Yes, Madam Chairman, the staff is recommending a -2 under the state and the bylaw with the resource areas boundaries not confirmed. And just to let the board know, there also is a set of stairs that's going in.
So moved. Second.
Any questions or comments from the board? Anything from the public? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous, so moved. Robert and Joyce Bach, 52 Chester Street, North Falmouth, Massachusetts, for permission to replace existing deck.
-2 under the state and the bylaw with the resource area boundaries not confirmed.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments from the board? Anything from the public? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous, so moved. Robert and Mary Jane Kaplan, 197 Coonamessett Circle, East Falmouth, Massachusetts, for permission to vista prune according to FWR 10.18, 10B.
Yes, we are continuing that, Madam Chairman, until June 27th.
All right, I think we need a motion.
So moved.
Second.
All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous, so moved. Kevin Dunn, 27 Fells Road, Falmouth, Massachusetts, for permission to vista prune according to FWR 1018, 10B.
Again, a continuance until June 27th.
So moved. Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous, so moved.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
are those two continuances,
Related?
are they still requests for determination of applicability?
I assume so because...
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, okay, they weren't a positive.
No.
Okay, thank you.
Staff just didn't have the ability to go out with their arborist to review the vista corridors.
Thank you.
Louise Stanwood, 96 Chappaquoit Road, West Falmouth, Massachusetts, for permission to vista prune according to FWR 1018, 10B.
Yes, Madam Chairman, we are recommending a -2 under the state and the bylaw with the resource area boundaries not confirmed.
So moved.
Second.
All right, any questions or comments? Anything from the public? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous, so moved. All right, next we move to request for hearings under a notice of intent. All hearings of the Falmouth Conservation Commission are held simultaneously under the authorities of the Massachusetts Wetlands Protection Act and the Falmouth Wetlands Bylaw. Although a single decision of the commission is issued, it represents a separate decision under each authority. First, we have White Sands Association, care of Gregory Marcotte, 59 Davis Neck Road, East Falmouth, Massachusetts, for permission to perform beach nourishment on 135 linear feet of beach and add 450 cubic yards of sand. Good evening, Mike.
Madam Chairman, members of the Commission, for the record, my name is Michael Borselli, Falmouth Engineering, and I represent the applicant. The applicant is before you tonight in hopes of obtaining your permission to do beach nourishment on the property referenced in the application. This property has been before you to receive an order of conditions for the very same activities in the past. The order of conditions expired and the work had been done, a certificate of compliance had been issued, and we're back to apply for the same activities, which is beach nourishment on the beach property owned by White Sands Association. The plans before you are more specific is with regard to the means and methods to place the sand. And I will review that with you. I'm joined tonight by Jonathan Searles from Francisco Tavares. He would be the project manager on site to do this work if it were approved. The property is located at the beach owned by White Sands at the very end of Davis Neck Road. There's an existing stone revetment along the upper edge of the beach. The beach is on the waters of Vineyard Sound. And the proposal is to place the sand on the association-owned beach above mean-high water in an amount of approximately 150 cubic yards per event. We're hoping to place 150 cubic yards per season for a total of the 3 years that the order would be active. And the means of placing the sand includes a slurry pump that would be staged on Davis Neck Road in an area that is currently the terminal end of the dirt road. No vegetation is proposed to be removed. This is an area where the public parks to gain access to the beach. The pump, slurry pump, would deliver sand via a flexible hose that would run and be placed on the existing access footpath used by the public, and it would be moved around on the beach. No equipment would be on the beach. This would all be hand labor, placing of the sand slurry mixture, and it would be raked out by hand by a crew from Francisco Tavares. The sand is delivered via truck over the roadway at Davis Neck Road, and the slurry is created by pumping seawater via a pump that would be placed in the tidal zone and pump the water up to the slurry machine, for lack of a more technical term. The slurry is created and then it's delivered back onto the beach, so the seawater would then drain back into Vineyard Sound. It's very similar to or analogous to hydraulic dredging, if you've seen the county dredging any of the entrances. But that size discharge pipe is much larger than this would be. But the end result is the slurry is a combination of sand and water. And it's controlled so that there's no erosion, and can be controlled by the laborers that are doing the work, and they basically work their way off the beach, and then when all the work is complete, they disassemble and leave. And then that's pretty much the extent of the activities. All of the work will be above mean-high water. We have shown a limit of work on the plan. I show it as silt fence. It may not be the most practical limit of work because of wind action, but there would certainly be a visual barrier to alert the workmen not to place the sand below mean-high water. The average thickness would be between 6 and 12 inches of sand, and we did the calculation on the volume, and it's approximately 150 cubic yards from the toe of the revetment to perhaps 5 to 6 feet above mean-high water. And that pretty much sums it up. I'm here to answer questions as well as Jonathan.
Thank you, Mike. The summary in our agenda says 450 cubic yards.
Yes, the total would be 3 successive events, 150
Okay.
cubic yards per event.
Thank you. Mark?
Yeah, it says in the introduction that its own property is owned, or at least the application is on the benefit of White Sands, Gregory Marquette, and the town of Falmouth. Where does the town live?
So the town owns Davis Neck Road. Davis Neck Road is a public road, and it actually extends to the water. So a portion of the nourishment, it's a very small portion, is on the road layout, if you will, at the beach. There's a set of public stairs right here. And the footpath where the delivery pipes would be placed in the actual slurry machine are on a town road. We attached to the application an easement agreement with the town. We went to and obtained permission from the Board of Selectmen to be able to maintain the seawall and the beach and all that.
All right, Peter?
Could you clarify the washed out area, the eroded area is not included in the project? When I went to the site, I saw a washed out area.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you look closely at the plan, you'll see an area that says area of erosion,
Okay.
and it's more eastward. It's east of the town road layout on land owned by others in this location here.
So that's not impacting either way?
Right.
Just
It's just
separate.
nearby and
Okay.
adjacent to. Right.
Okay, no further questions?
Okay, thank you. Steve?
My questions were in the same vein. The impact of that erosion on your steps or on the association-owned property is immaterial to your application?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Jamie?
When was the last time this was done?
2 years ago.
2 years ago, I'm being told.
Okay, and you said the applicant previously obtained an easement from the town. Is that an ongoing?
Yes, it's ongoing.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Hold on. June 15th?
What,
May 15th to June 15th? Are you intending to do that this year?
is that what my application says? Oh,
The
we're,
sand will be placed between May 15th and June 15th of each season.
we prefer that to be May to August. I think it's common to do it from May to August, so that, I may have been a little optimistic on when we were gonna get the order of conditions.
Thank you.
All right, that's it.
I have a couple of questions, just, so 150 cubic yards is about 10 wheelers? Is that right?
15 to 20 yards of truckload.
So more or less 10.
More or less, yes.
Okay, so how long will this take? I don't have a problem with the project, but I'm just wondering.
The actual delivery.
Yes, please. Introduce, identify yourself.
Jonathan Searles with Francisco Tavares. The actual delivery process would probably take about 4 days to move the sand from the staging area through the slurry system down to the beach, and then maybe 2 days to finish hand raking it.
So it's like 2 trucks? Well, yeah, so I'm just thinking about the neighbors. So, I mean, because it was quiet, it was lovely there when I was there yesterday, but it's going to be filled with people soon.
Start to finish would be about a week and a half, with removing all the pumps and the hoses and everything, yes.
Okay. I'm just be aware of the fact that, it's getting a truck in there
Oh, I did a
It's-
project on Willis Lane last year.
is going to be, it's going to be tight, and there's going to be a lot of people. Just a word of caution. That's all. Thank you.
Courtney?
No questions.
Kevin?
No questions.
All right.
Madam Chairman, I have one question. Mike, it
Certainly.
doesn't say anything in here about beach nourishment, the grant of the seawall easement. It only says to continue repair and maintenance of the seawall as necessary. It says nothing about beach nourishment.
Right, so maintenance, one of the key elements of maintaining a wall is to make sure it doesn't fall into the ocean by being undermined and settling of the toe stones. So it's imperative that the sand be nourishment be placed at the toes so that the wall doesn't settle and need to be actually reconstructed. If for some reason you don't think the easement is satisfactory, we would probably not place the sand there, but I believe that the intent of the easement was to allow that to happen.
And it's the same easement that you used in your previous order.
Yes.
Up to the board.
Make a motion to close the hearing and take it under advisement.
Right. Any other questions or comments from the board? Any questions or comments from the public? Right, hearing none. All those in favor of closing the hearing say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous, so moved.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next is Anthony Cipro, 91 Bywater Court, which has been continued to June 13th. So we have now Acapesket Improvement Association, Vineyard Street, map 45-08-000-006E, East Falmouth, Massachusetts, for permission to perform beach maintenance, including raking, screening, cleaning, and minor grading.
Madam Chairman, again for the record, Michael Borselli, Falmouth Engineering. I represent the applicant, Acapesket Beach Improvement Association. We are before you tonight to obtain permission to do some maintenance and management of the public beach owned by the Acapesket Improvement Association on a parcel of land that they own adjacent to Vineyard Street with beach frontage on Vineyard Sound just west of the entrance to Green Pond Channel. The land is a spit of barrier beach, including land under the ocean, land subject to tidal action, coastal beach. There's a dune system, landward of the beach, and on the north side is another beach area not part of the application. The property owned by the association has frontage here and is located in this location. This is an application that you reviewed previously as well. It had received an order of conditions. It had also received one or two extensions of the order of conditions to allow for the management and maintenance of this recreational beach. There's a boardwalk, volleyball area located here. The public walks through on the boardwalk and uses the beach. And the proposal is to do raking, cleaning, and sorting of the material as necessary, similar to activities that are performed along the town beach located on Minot Road near the baseball field, and similar to other local beaches. The work is proposed to be performed by George Botello, Inc. Gary Botello from George Botello, Inc. is here tonight if there's any questions for him. This is basically a redo of the last project that you approved. On the original application back several years ago, we had proposed to put winter fencing, and we were discouraged from doing that the first time around, and we removed that activity from the application, so the work is only limited to the maintenance of the beach so that it's more usable for the public. There were concerns about protecting the dune. The original order of conditions required that we place limit of work fencing adjacent to the dune, and there's no work proposed within 5 feet of the toe of the dune. So we've incorporated that into the plan. I happened to be there today, and I noticed that it appears that the county dredge has been placing sand near here, and I don't, that's independent of what our project is. So there's already been some sand placed in some of these areas on the beach, and I noticed that the hoses and things are still staged there. Our access is through here by a small skid steer type rubber tracked machine. It's been done in the past. I think Jen has been on the site during the activities with the contractor, so we think it's pretty straightforward. And I'm here as well as Gary to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Jen?
I just have one question, Mike. Go back to the snow fencing. You said you were discouraged
Oh, I'm sorry.
by who? Yeah.
Well, on some of the beach management projects that we had done several years ago, there was a concept where you'd put snow fencing on the beach to collect and trap sand in like a sawtooth fashion. And we were, I believe, told that it was preferred that we not do that on this project. So and it was actually referenced in the order. We took those activities out of the plan.
Okay. Gary, continue to notify me when you're, thank you for doing that.
All set, Jen?
Yes.
Kevin?
No problem.
Courtney?
No questions.
Betsy?
Mike would be disappointed if I didn't ask him a
We
question.
all.
I just have a couple of questions for any of these beach nourishment. Are there ever time of year restrictions?
Yes, some of them.
So do they have to apply to DMF?
Mike, did you apply to DMF in this one? I don't think so, because you're above.
Above mean high.
Yeah, it's above mean high.
It's above mean
Yeah,
high,
the only
okay.
time of year restriction I would see on this type of project would be plovers.
Well, that was my next question. Plover, question mark, question mark. And the other thing I want to say, Mike, in your, and actually Gary too, you say with the raking, with the, getting the pebbles, and saving those, and actually putting those right on the toe of the dune, because that'll help collect sand. So I would put that as close to that toe of the dune, not on top of the vegetation, but as close as possible. So, that's all.
Thanks, Betsy. Jamie?
You're not proposing to add any sand?
No.
Thank you.
It's being added as we
Yeah,
As we
well,
speak.
by that,
Yeah.
by the applicant.
Right.
Thank you.
Steve?
No questions, thank you.
Peter?
Just to clarify, the proposed project said the activities will be performed May 15th through September 15th. Is that still the plan?
We're hoping to do it prior to July 4th. And it may have said that in the application, but the reality is very soon, if the weather were to cooperate, the beach is going to be active. So the work is either going to happen we're hoping you can process the order in the very near future, and we're hoping we can do it one time before July 4th, and then there'll be no activities, probably till the following time next
Spring,
year.
yeah.
So it could be conditioned that way.
Mark?
No comments.
All right. So do we need to investigate about the plover?
No, I don't think so.
I think you would have heard, right?
We would have
They
heard.
would have heard from Audubon, or whoever does that.
Courtney?
I'll move to close the hearing and take it under advisement.
I'll second.
All right, anything else from the board? Any comments or questions from the public? All right, hearing none? Oh, yes, come on, sir.
Hi, my name is Dennis Downey, and I live at 49 Union Street. Right here. And I spoke 4 years ago when the first proposal came up, and Betsy said, let's just see what happens. Our concern at the time was that it's all one beach, the sand moves all around, and I was concerned that somehow whatever they would do would give us more stones, more cobble, which that was absolutely our experience. Nothing happened the first year. They didn't do any work. They didn't do any work the second year. In the third year, they did some work. I don't know where the rocks went, except that our swath of cobble, which has been there all the time, doubled, and the depth of it went. We just had so much, and it was striking. I took pictures, and I showed them to Jen, standing one way looking at their beach, standing that way, and he has all the cobbles. I asked Jen where the cobbles were. She didn't know. I asked Mike one time. He didn't know. So where they put the cobbles is, it's my suspicion that they just put them down on our edge and they loaded them down there, but I don't know where they went. So that is a big question. If they are taking them off the beach, where are they putting them on their same beach?
But did you hear what my recommendation is? They put them right along the edge of the dune, all the way from the groin to the,
I did hear that.
along their land.
Yeah.
We can condition that.
Yeah. So, I mean, you know, the beach changes so much with storms and weather.
Sure.
Sometimes their beaches and ours is very narrow. So even if you put the stones right up next to that dune, like you suggest, right up against the toe, the water's going to come right up to there too. I mean, I think their purpose is to try to get the cobble out of the way of the beach part. But where they put it is important, and I want to be sure they don't just put it down on the edge of ours, so that we might end up with it. Okay, but I do know anecdotally that we receive, it seems to us, 2 to 3 times as much cobble now in that beach system after they did this work. Okay. Thank
Continue
you.
to watch it.
Well, I watched it. What else could you do? Yeah.
Things change, right?
Sure. Okay.
But you're right, it's all one
But, yeah,
system.
well, I do.
It's all one system,
When
and
you
you're all getting sand right now.
We are. It was a miracle,
Yeah.
what they did this week, yeah. But anyway, okay, right.
Thank you, Mr. Downey.
So, yeah.
Anything else from the public? All right.
Should I need a second?
I know we did.
Yeah.
All those in favor of closing the hearing, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous, so moved. Thank you. All right. Yes. Next, we have K. Con, 438 Seacoast Shores Boulevard, East Falmouth, Massachusetts, for permission to construct a 185 square foot deck addition to an existing dwelling.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I get 2 things though, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
It was over here.
I couldn't remember, I know Joel came down and talked.
Good evening, Tim.
Good evening. For the record, Tim Santos from Holmes & McGrath, representing the applicant. The property is currently developed with an existing single-family home. The resource area is on or within 100 feet of the property are land under the ocean, land containing shellfish, coastal beach, coastal bank, land subject to coastal storm flowage. The applicant is proposing to construct a 185 square foot deck in the rear of the house, currently developed with lawn. And we're also proposing to install, I believe, 531 square feet of mitigation plantings in accordance with your redevelopment regulations. It's a pretty straightforward project. If the board has any questions, I'd be happy to address them.
Thank you. Jamie?
No question.
Steve?
The existing deck, is that the concrete?
No, the existing deck is a wooden deck.
And wooden deck, and you're just adding in?
It's an expansion, yes.
Okay, so you're not redoing the whole deck?
Correct, just the expansion.
Okay, no more questions.
Peter?
No trees are going to be cut.
There are no trees proposed to be removed in the area of the proposed deck.
Further questions?
Are there trees?
There are no trees proposed to be removed
Thank you.
on the plan. I probably should have said that.
Well, within jurisdiction anyway. Mark?
No questions.
All right. Kevin?
No.
Courtney?
No
No.
questions.
Betsy?
No questions, thank you.
My goodness. All right.
I'll move to close the hearing and take it under advisement.
Second.
All right. Anything else from the board? Anything from the public on this application? Hearing no comments, Call for the vote. All those in favor of closing the hearing say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous. So moved. Thank you. This is eerie. Yeah. All right. Jonathan Tower, 66 Kroll Road, East Falmouth, Massachusetts, for permission to raise and reconstruct the existing dwelling with an attached garage, install a terrace, screen porch, driveway reconfiguration, dry wells, steps on the coastal bank, and the associated clearing, excavating, grading, and landscaping. Thank you.
Thanks.
Again, for the record, Tim Santos from Homes in McGrath, representing the applicant. The property is located at 66 Kroll Road, along Barnes Pond. The resource area is on or within 100 feet of the property. Barnes Pond itself, coastal beach, salt marsh, coastal bank, and land subject to coastal storm flowage. The property is currently developed with an existing single-family home. The applicant is proposing to demolish that home and would like to construct a new home. In doing so, we are proposing to move the house back further away from the top of the bank. Landlord, I believe, grab the dimensions. So the house itself currently is 20 feet from the coastal bank, and we're moving it back, so we'll be set back 30 feet. And the deck and terrace at the closest point currently is 7 feet, and we'll be moving it back to 14 feet. All roof runoff will go to dry wells as shown. We're proposing to reconfigure the driveway and add a drainage system. The house is currently served by a cesspool, as shown to the rear of the existing house, and we'll be proposing a new Title V compliant system up front under the driveway over 150 feet away from the top of the bank. Sorry, over 100 feet away from the top of the bank. We do have redevelopment calc shown on the plan, and it's about 1,300 square feet less of structures and driveway that would be proposed than currently what exists. There are also a set of granite steps that we're showing being proposed going down the slope to a small timber set of stairs that lead down to the beach area. We feel that this is a better way to get down there than the current, what I'll call kind of worn out path that keeps getting eroded by the foot traffic. There are some areas of buffer planting. Some of you might be familiar with this project. I think it was here about 1.5 years ago for a coastal bank restoration. They are still proposing to do that. They're going to incorporate it. If this project gets approved, both projects will be taking place more or less at the same time. So those plantings will go in, as well as the removal of the old concrete remnants down at the salt marsh. I believe earlier this evening the utilities were approved. The utilities will be coming from Starfish Lane through an easement to this property. And if the board has any questions, I'd be more than happy to address them.
Thank you, Tim. Jen, do you have anything?
No.
Right. That's it.
I do have some things. Tim should have realized he wasn't going to get out of here scot-free. One is, this plan actually does have trees.
Yes.
In fact, at a minimum, you're taking at least 12 trees and at a minimum of 138 inches. And so I'm wondering what you're going to offer for that.
Currently,
Currently, it's zero.
Currently, it's zero. I mean, the lot is over 1.7, 1.68 acres. It's very vegetated and wooded if you've been there.
I have been there. I have another comment, too.
We can talk about the trees if need be for compensation.
Well, I think you'll have to think about that. The other question I have, and this is much more significant. I mean, no, I shouldn't say more significant. There are a lot of trees on this lot, but you're moving back, and you have a coastal bank that isn't just an eroding coastal bank. It has a huge chunk bitten out of it, and it's really steep. And I'm wondering why, I mean, this is gonna be $1 million put into this house, why you're not moving further back.
Well, we feel this is the best placement for the house. This is where the applicant would like it. Also, once the coastal bank restoration project takes place, that will help shore up the bank that's currently.
It's the core fiber rolls from stuff.
Yeah, it's core fiber rolls.
Did we
That
approve
happened.
that?
Yeah, it's been approved.
Ah,
Very,
all
very
right.
steep bank.
Yeah.
Salt marsh pillows at the base he's gonna use.
Oh, yeah, all right.
Remember? He's gonna
All
put
right.
the salt marsh pillows at the
There was
base.
one, I believe it was that big March storm that
Probably
caused
just-
that
Yeah.
major.
This new,
Yeah,
yeah,
the new, correct.
yeah.
So they're well aware it needs to be.
I would, so there can't be any armoring, hard armoring
Yeah,
on
we
here.
understand that.
Right. I would rethink that a little bit, even with core fibers. I mean, this is
That's
obviously
a steep bank.
a targeted area. And that's all. Yes, we will think trees. We may,
Trees.
we can condition that if you don't want to offer anything.
We can keep moving down, and I will talk with the architect in a second.
Okay.
All right. You all set, Bessie, for now? Courtney?
No oranges.
Kevin?
Fine, thanks.
You all set?
That's it.
Okay, Mark?
Well, I like you moving back to the bank. That is incredibly close to current houses, near and far from the water. I don't think most of fiber rolls are from the bank. I think they stink. They don't last very long. That's my personal opinion. I like the idea of moving farther back from the bank also. I think that's just prudent. That's all I have.
Thank you. Peter?
I commend the plan because it's moving the house back and replacing a cesspool system with a Title V system. And a lot of people are sensitive to the pollution of Bourne's Pond. So that, I like that. No further questions.
Thank you. Steve?
Right, I also like this coming back, but could we get back to the restoration project? That, nothing's happened on that since,
Nothing's happened on that. That's approved under the previous
Right.
order of conditions. It's still valid, and it will be done.
In
prior
conjunction.
to.
Well, it'll be done in conjunction with the coastal bank restoration and the house
That's
project.
still
It'll be,
Yeah.
it's still valid.
Right. The staff has a question on that?
No.
Oh, okay, I saw that questioning look. Again, as the letter from the abutter, I thought was relevant that he cleared that up and he supports it, and the easement coming through his property also made it easier to visit the property, coming in from that direction. We've had a series of homes built along Kroll Road. It's really changed the visage of, as you could, I live just up farther, so I kayak by there and it's changed. My grandchildren will miss the opportunity to slide down that hill, but, you know, that's something they shouldn't have done anyway. That's all.
Thank you, Steve. Jamie? All right.
Mark?
Yes, Mark.
I have another comment. It's not the coastal bank. I think it's certainly my observation that trying to maintain a 45-degree slope, which this is at least 45 degrees, maybe even steeper than that, with fiber rolls, just means this doesn't work. And I think, again, moving the house farther back, because during the restoration, either you're going to encroach on the bank, on the beach, or you're going to cut away some of the top of the bank, or putting it closer to the house. And neither of those are really very good solutions. So I really think a very pragmatic situation is getting it farther away from the top of that bank. That's all.
I'll make a motion to close the hearing, take one of those.
Yeah, second.
Courtney, second.
Yeah, but
Go ahead.
I'm perfectly happy to to discuss
Let me
the
just,
trees.
if you give me 2 seconds to discuss the trees with the architect who represents the applicant as well.
That's fine.
Just
thank
1
you.
second, please.
If they want to- I'll put in $1 million. But they can come for an amendment.
It sounds worse.
Yeah.
It's cesspool, it's horrible, the septic is good for,
But
the point of biological.
Did you like that site, Kevin? Did you
Well,
like
it has to
that?
be
It's
there
further
before
back.
they finish.
Yeah, yeah.
I
wouldn't.
Well,
Cesspool
not- not-
pretty close to the shore.
Well, that's
Oh, I mean,
I'm really listening to the sing house.
the phrase, cesspool. It's pretty pejorative.
And they're just as steep.
Doesn't mean that they're gonna be there for long. If I was putting $1 million into a house, I'm gonna enjoy it for.
So I believe I counted 6 trees within the A zone. Is that, do you count 6 trees, Betsy?
well, I counted A and B zone.
Well, I'm counting 6 within the A zone.
Yes,
So we'd be willing to propose to plant 6 trees within the A zone that
Where?
coming down.
6 cedar trees.
6 cedar trees. And then we can meet with staff on location.
Okay, yes,
Okay.
and that's what I would suggest.
Okay.
I mean,
No, I was just gonna say, where? But,
Yeah.
well,
I'm saying
I
where.
think this is a situation where you want to,
Do it on site.
yeah, you want to
Yeah.
see what the view is going to be. Yeah,
Obviously, you know, it would have to be as close to the bank in the A zone as possible. So.
Yeah. Where?
yeah, I mean,
Oh, we'll have fun out with
between
Bill.
the staff and you, Tim,
There's room.
and the architect,
We'll find some
figure it out.
place.
So, we have a motion second on the table.
We have a second on the motion, all right. Anything else from the board? Anything from the public on this application? All right. All those in favor of saying, of closing the hearing, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Unanimous, so moved.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a great weekend.
This is almost frightening.
Thank you, you too, Tim.
Night,
All right,
Tim.
I've
we're
missed
going,
that. Have a great weekend.
Yes.
It's always Tim's
Tim's nice.
closing.
So, I'm about to propose a very quick break so that the commissioners who are not on the forum for anything else may leave if they'd like to, but Jen, would you just make sure of the quorum for 21 Bay
I
Road
am
before we do that?
doing it. The quorum for Falmouth Circle is Mark, Mary, Kevin, and Courtney.
Mark,
And
Mary,
21 Bay Road, please.
21 Fay Road, Mark, Peter, Mary, Betsy, Kevin, and Courtney. Steve, I think you're the only one that, Steve and Jamie.
Steve and Jamie are excused if they would like to be.
Thank you.
I'd like to be too.
Well, it's a horse of a different color. Sorry.
That's all right.
Okay, I think we can proceed. Continued request for a hearing under a notice of intent. Falmouth Circle LLC, care of Randall Lilly, Worcester Court and Alma Road, map 39-16-0001A, lots 003, 004, 5, 6, 7, 9, and 10, Falmouth Circle, private right-of-way, and Falmouth Circle, lot 16, Falmouth, Massachusetts, for permission to construct a 40B development of 28 three-bedroom homes along with associated sidewalks, driveways, and the associated clearing, excavating, grading, and landscaping. So I think everybody who's still here is well aware that we've had several sessions of this hearing. And this one tonight was necessitated by the fact that the board wanted an expert opinion on the question of the stability of the coastal banks with the construction that is proposed to take place. And we do have We have received that, and we have our expert here tonight who can tell us about it. But first, I'd like to know if the applicant's representatives would like to say anything. No? Okay. Jim, this is Jim O'Connell, who performed the analysis on behalf of the board, and he's going to give us a summary for the benefit of the people at home and the people here who may not have had a chance to review it in our office. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, I read it.
Good evening, Commissioners. For the record, Jim O'Connell, coastal geologist and certified floodplain manager with Coastal Advisory Services. As was just stated, I was retained by the Commission to do a peer review of this project, but the peer review was strictly limited to the current present stability of the coastal bank and what potential impacts may be to the stability of the coastal bank from the project itself. I was provided with all the information that was submitted with the with the notice of intent, as well as the supplemental information that was submitted from LEC Environmental. I did a site visit on June 2nd with Mark Kasperzak from Conservation. We walked the entire site, took our time looking at it. I took some photographs, and I did provide you with a report dated May 29, 2018, which outlined my observations and documentation of my opinion of the existing stability or lack thereof and what the potential impacts may be. Because the coastal bank is, and this was stated in the NOI, but I'll restate it anyway, it's my own opinion, because the coastal bank is relatively densely vegetated, it's not subject to any vigorous wave action, therefore it's not eroding due to wave action. It's not providing sediment, not eroding, providing sediment to coastal dunes, coastal beaches, or down to Barrier Beach. It will be considered a vertical buffer bank under the regulations. The DEP wetland protection regulations is very closely aligned with the Falmouth wetland protection regulations in terms of the performance standards for coastal banks. For vertical buffer coastal banks, the primary issue for the vertical buffer coastal bank is maintaining its stability. It's primarily subject to rain and runoff, which would affect its erodibility, but not wave activity. The interest of stability, maintaining its stability, the interest of storm damage prevention and flood control are operative for this review under the coastal bank. I not only reviewed what was in the notice of intent submitted for this project, but I also reviewed the order of conditions in the plan that was issued for the Falmouth Housing Authority for the adjacent property, because that's where the top of the coastal bank, and from what I could gather from the contours on that plan, were important to the review of this particular project as well. There's 4 coastal banks that I considered in this project. One of the coastal banks on the east side, and I'll go through each one of these very briefly because we can discuss it in more detail, but I'll go through my observations and my opinion very briefly. But there's 4 coastal banks that I analyzed. There's one coastal bank on the east side between Little Pond and the project itself, which is entirely on the applicant's property. There's another coastal bank where part of the top of the coastal bank is on this particular piece of property. The remainder of that other bank is on the Falmouth Authority property. And the other 2 banks, which I gave you a diagram labeling 1, 2, 3, and 4. What I labeled coastal banks 3 and 4 are actually off-site. They're on the Falmouth Authority property adjacent to the north. So if I can briefly go through it, there's no work actually proposed on the coastal bank itself, and it's a vertical buffer. On Coastal Bank 1, which was entirely on the property between Little Pond and the property itself, well, let me step back. When I analyzed the stability, the existing stability of a coastal bank, there's a number of factors that I take into consideration when I'm analyzing this. The steepness of the slope, the density and the type of vegetation, the soil composition, whether it's subject to, what kind of erosive forces it's subject to. Is it wave activity? Is it just rain and wind runoff? And then, of course, looking at, and then the presence or absence of rills, gullies, or groundwater breakout. That would allow me to look at the existing stability and come up with the opinion of the existing stability of the bank. And then, of course, you have to factor in the type of activities that are in close proximity to the top of the coastal bank and the face of the bank to look at what the potential impacts may be. So in terms of Coastal Bank 1, facing Little Pond, it's approximately between a 5.0 and 6.1 to 1 slope. So it's not necessarily steep. I would say anything between a 10 to 1 slope and a 4 to 1 slope I would consider moderately steep. Anything greater than 4 to 1 I would consider steep, and anything less than 10 to 1 is not considered a coastal bank. It's land subject to coastal flowage if it's within the FEMA map floodplain. All the coastal banks are subject to, they're in the A zone, so they are subject to the 100-year flood, but only to pretty much still water elevation. So in terms of Coastal Bank 1, we have a mildly steep slope, less than 4 to 1, greater than 10 to 1. The limit of work is about 20 feet. The limit of work is about 20 feet away from the top of the bank, and the foundation is about 65 feet. It meets all the criteria. It's relatively well vegetated. It's within the Merrimack sandy loam soils, which generally that has, in general, usually greater than 50% sand. So they are described by, in their soil characteristics as well-drained soils, and they generally occur on outwash plains, which is pretty much most of the south side of Falmouth and Mashpee. So the outwash plains, well-drained. So looking at those critical characteristics that I look for stability, they're relatively well vegetated. It's only going to have a mildly steep slope. It's in the Merrimack sandy loam soils, which are well drained. So I don't really see, and because of the setbacks, the foundation about 65 feet, and the limit of work about 20. I think the coastal bank itself presently is relatively stable, and I don't really see that there will be an impact from this project if the erosion and sedimentation controls, and I know there was a peer review, I was told there was a peer review already on the erosion and sedimentation and on the stormwater management plan as well by another professional. But it's important for me to know the characteristics of those two plans, because the primary problem with possibly creating instability of these banks would be wind and rain runoff, and runoff being primarily caused by the removal of vegetation on the subject site. But because there's about a 20-foot setback from the limit of work and about a 65-foot from the exact foundation, and so if the erosion and sedimentation controls and the stormwater management plan are adhered to and checked periodically to ensure that they're functioning properly, I don't really see any significant or even a minor impact from this project. I think the bank is pretty much relatively stable at the present time. That's Coastal Bank 1 on the east side. If we move around to the north side, Coastal Bank 2, part of the top of that coastal bank is on the applicant's property, and part of it is on the Falmouth Housing Authority property. Coastal Bank 2, that's a steep bank. The contours on the Falmouth Housing Authority plan were broken up by words, so I couldn't really get as many transects I would have liked to have to just look at it, but it was already approved that the coastal bank, the top of the coastal bank was already approved. I was just interested in looking at the steepness and then the other characteristics, vegetation and soil characters and so forth. But the Coastal Bank 2, in the vicinity of Lot 12, it's about, there were enough contours there, there's about a 2 to 1 slope. That's a steep slope. So what I would do when I'm looking at that is the same characteristics. It's relatively well vegetated. There's a lot of leaf litter on top of the organic matter on the top soil. It's relatively steep. It is steep, but it's relatively well vegetated. It's back in the Merrimack sandy loam soil, so there's going to be a lot of percolation because there's generally, as I said, about 50% sandy soils, and then there's silt and very little clay. So I anticipate there's going to be very good percolation of rainwater. And from reading the files, at least this was stated in the NOI and in the LEC reports, that no runoff is anticipated to reach the top of the bank or cascade over the top of the bank if the stormwater plan and the erosion sedimentation controls are kept in place. This is the steepest coastal bank that I encountered on the entire site, so I would keep an eye on this only because of its steepness. One of the issues with this is the limit of work, I believe, is only about 5 feet landward off the top of the coastal bank. This is a pretty steep coastal bank. The limit of work is pretty close. But again, If they can keep the stormwater from cascading over the top of the bank onto the bank face itself, it should have very little impact on the stability of the bank. However, the limit of work being 5 feet, if you look at the plan, and this is just, I'm throwing this up at the commission, you could ask the commission, it appeared as if lot 11, the building itself, which is about, the foundation about 27 feet away, and then the limit of work is about 5, it appears as if building 11 could be moved slightly landward and slightly to the east, which then would allow you to move the limit of work a little bit farther away from the top of the bank. I don't really consider it a big issue. I did, at the end of my report, I was a little concerned about the steepness of this and possibly groundwater breakout because of percolation. But they've got dry wells. They've got that what they call in a depression. I guess it's a vegetated swale that runs right along the top of the bank. I was a little concerned that possibly, if enough volume got through there at one point in time, that there could be groundwater breakout. But I call that a very minor issue because the Merrimack sandy loam soils are very high perk rate. So I anticipate that there probably won't be any. It's just something because of the steepness. I would keep an eye on that and do some possibly require some monitoring of that particular site itself. So I just think that the limit of work could possibly be moved a little bit farther landward if you look at the location of the house. It's a question I think you should ask just to give a little bit more safety buffer to the stability of that actual part of the bank. We moved to Coastal Bank 3, which was in the central part of the northern area on that particular lot. That's also, we're still in the Merrimack sandy loam, but I believe half of that lot now is transitioning into the infield soils, which has a little bit more silt, quite a bit more silt in it relative to the sandy soils of the Merrimack. So now I've got to watch out a little bit about the percolation, because the percolation rate, I believe, is going to be a little bit lower for rainwater. But again, they've got the vegetated swale, they've got dry wells along there. They're putting up the rail fence to keep people from off the top of that. And in addition to that, that's a relatively mild slope. That's where it's landward of the BBW and the certified vernal pool, which is on the town's property. But it's a relatively mild slope, and the limit of work there is about 40 feet away from the top of the bank, which I think is pretty adequate given the relative slope. Relatively mild slope, again, the vegetation, the type of soils, and the limit of work being about 40 feet back, and the foundation's about 60 feet back. So I think that's fairly well safe from any impacts that could destabilize the bank in that particular area itself. So now if we move back up to Coastal Bank 4, which is on the northwest side of the property itself, now we've moved into what the soil survey is calling pits. Basically, remnants of the sand and gravel operation. But this is a kind of a parallel to what I looked at when I talked about lot 11. The limit of work, I believe, is only about, again, 5 feet away from the top of the bank. That's pretty close. And the foundation for lot number 1 is about 16. So I would be a little concerned about the closeness of the limit of work there, 5 feet away. But the same characteristics: vegetated swale, dry wells, the split rail fence. Relatively well vegetated. It's actually got, the bank's got actually 2 lobes up in that particular area, separated by a flat area. But that's because of human alteration, I think, back in the sand and gravel excavation days. But and it doesn't seem to be any room to be able to move that limit of work back because the house is kind of sandwiched in there. But it's 5 feet. 5 feet is pretty close to have your limit of work to the top of any bank, even if it's a relatively mild slope. So my suggestion is, I guess I would ask why there's not a significant effort in providing an additional vegetated buffer, particularly in these areas where the limit of work is so close. Why there's not a vegetated buffer with vegetation that you'd normally see in a rain garden, so that it can actually absorb more rainwater than I think what you would see in the natural vegetation. Because the natural vegetation, I mean, I'm saying it's relatively dense, but it's sparse in some areas as well. And the limit of work is so close in those areas, I would suggest, why is there not a significant dense vegetative buffer with the correct kind of plants that would absorb more rainwater, just in the event that happens. But again, according to the modeling and in the reviews of the stormwater management plan, they're saying that they're doing everything they can to prevent any type of runoff going over the top of the bank onto the bank face itself. So overall, I think all of the banks are relatively stable due to all the characteristics that I view when I'm looking at the stability of a soils, and the stability of the face of the coastal bank itself. And because of the stormwater management plan, the dry wells, the swales, and so forth, I think they've done probably everything they could to try to prevent any destabilization of the coastal banks on the site. But there are a couple of things, as I had mentioned, that I think that the commission could entertain in terms of just a little bit more security for those areas where the limit of work is just so close to the bank and the foundations are so close to the bank. So I'm available for any questions that anybody may have.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jen.
Jen, do you have any?
No.
Mark?
Do you know where the water table is on this property?
Didn't see that anyway.
Brand concrete engineering, it's about 16 feet down from the testing that we've seen.
How far is that compared to the bottom of the coastal
It's
bank?
below the coastal bank. So the bank's about, I think at the highest point, it's at 12 feet high, 11 feet high. So in the testing on our site showed that the water table is about 16 feet down. So
It's below the bottom of the
Correct.
coastal bank. So
Correct.
it take a lot of water to kind of break out.
correct.
Would you have any concern, is there any reason to be concerned about, during the construction process itself, any effects of vibratory action?
No, I don't think I would. Only because of and I know that, we're looking at 50% or more sandy soils, which generally can move around, but these are outwash plains. These are sands that were laid down many thousands of years ago. So I think, for the most part, you're not looking at dunes or beaches or relatively recently deposited sands. That they have, after this amount of time, rainwater percolation with the plant, with plant material and plant matters, I think they're about as stable as that they can be. So I wouldn't anticipate. I think you're talking more about a geotechnical analysis to be able to look at the cohesion of the soil in terms of vibration. But from a coastal geologist standpoint, I wouldn't anticipate to see anything significant happen to the base of the bank. The only bank that I would keep an eye on would be the Coastal Bank 2 on the east side, only because of its steepness. The others, I think the slopes are so moderate that I wouldn't anticipate it. It's just that one where there's about a 2-to-1 slope that I keep an eye on.
Okay, thank you. Courtney, any questions?
The location of the dry wells for the roof runoff, are those of any concern to you?
No, I don't think so, because the swale concerns me a little bit. What they call in a depression, the vegetated swale. They've calculated that that's going to trap basically all the water on that side of the project. Because of the type of soils, I wouldn't anticipate any particular problem with the volume of water that would be into the dry wells or going into the swales. Again, the only part of the property that I would be concerned about would be north of Lot 11, where there's a 2-to-1 slope. The other slopes are just so gradual, I wouldn't anticipate that the groundwater, you would see any problems there.
Okay.
Thank you. Kevin, do you have any questions?
No real questions. It was, I thought, a very well-written report. I don't mean this as an insult, but even I couldn't understand it, so I felt a lot better. I felt a lot more comfortable about things after reading it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, does anyone in the public or from the applicant's representatives have any questions for Mr. O'Connor? Yes, sir. Or comments, so it doesn't have to be a question for him. Anything?
Hi, Mike Hatch, 64 Elmo Road. Jim, just a question. I know in your report several times you noted that there were certain criteria that were responsible for the stability of the bank as it presently exists. And a couple times you mentioned trees, root system, and vegetation. Under the new plan, a lot of that is going to disappear. And I'm just kind of wondering where it was noted as it being part of the reason why the bank is stable, how if all that glue, if you will, is removed from the bank, how will it not affect its stability?
Could you say that?
Oh, sure.
I didn't note that there was any work to be done on the coastal bank itself. So I didn't know if there was any vegetation.
I don't believe there
from the
is.
coastal
There
bank,
isn't.
from the base of the coastal bank.
Oh,
From the limit of work, landed is where the vegetation will be removed.
correct. So I'm sorry, I phrased that question wrong then.
Yeah.
With all of that vegetation and tree root system within the scope of the project, the 100-foot buffer, being removed as it currently exists, does that have a trickle-down effect that could negatively affect the bank?
I would say very little, if any, and I say that because of the contours, the way they're going to recontour it. When you remove vegetation, if there were any slope involved, anything greater than a mile slope, anything greater than 6 to 1, 5 to 1, whatever it may be, it's all. I think it's all graded. If they graded the surface runoff without any erosion controls or without any stormwater, if they graded that towards the bank, it would definitely be an impact. But because they're grading, from what I saw in the plans, is they're pretty much grading all of the rainwater towards the central part of the project, and then in the yards, I believe I don't think they're not grading towards the coastal bank itself. But they do have the dry wells and they do have the vegetation swell along the entire limit of, inside the limit of work. So I don't really see the removal of the vegetation causing any significant or any noticeable impact to the stability of the bank itself. But it's an excellent question, because when you remove vegetation, it's critical that you look at the slope and you look at the stormwater and the erosion, stormwater management and the erosion control. So I don't really think there's any noticeable impact because of the way they've designed the project.
Great, thank you, I appreciate it.
Thank you. Mr. Phelps.
Mark Stoves again, at 115 Lucerne Avenue, the intersection of Falmouth and Lucerne. So I had a couple of questions. I think it does get to the same issue of the fact that it's a forest area, so we're not talking about an open field. And the work involves the clear cutting of the 5 acres of forest, but then along the edge, you're going up to mature trees, correct? So I don't know if you considered the impact though of going, of falling trees, like in the last storms that we had in Worcester Court, because of the sewer work and the sidewalk work and the disruption of the root systems, we had trees down all over the place because of the wind and the rain. So that's one issue. And it may have been beyond the scope of your report, but I think a concern we all have is that along the abutters property line and along the coastal banks, the developer can't help it, but if they get this approved, they're in clear cut all that forest, but there's forest right up to the edge, right? So wind blowing against it no longer has a buffer, or blowing towards the development, there's no longer a buffer. So in terms of the coastal bank, falling trees is a question, that's one thing. And I think that, I think that's the key part of that. The other thing is when we had the storms, it was in the winter and the ground was frozen. So did you consider the fact that, will the drainage systems work when the ground is totally frozen and we get a major windstorm and rainstorm? Will the water go into the wells and where will the runoff go? When now we have permeable surface and going toward development, that'll be, I guess you say 40% is projected totally impermeable, and that's conservative, given that they could add sheds. So maybe if you can address those concerns.
The second part of your question about during the winter time when the grounds are frozen is a question, I think, for your peer reviewer for the stormwater management, for the stormwater management plan itself. I read everything in the site, but in terms of the stormwater management, that's something that another professional would have to answer, whether or not they have accommodated the factor of frozen soils in the middle of the winter. I think that's a question that needs to be answered by your stormwater peer review specialist. In terms of removing the vegetation, there's only when the limit of work, where it's only 5 feet away from the top of the coastal bank, if there are any trees within 5 feet of the top of the coastal bank, which will now be more exposed to wind and windrow and so forth, there's a possibility that some trees on the top could affect the top of the bank under some really severe hurricane conditions. But if that, if you get hurricane conditions or anything close to that, I think you're going to. It could possibly deroot some of the trees on the top. I think that's just something that I think you're going to have to consider. I don't think it's going to destabilize the face of the bank, unless it's right, unless the root systems go into the top of the bank. But that's, I don't think you can avoid that. That is a possibility, with only a 5-foot buffer left in either the trees or the shrubs that are on top there, but particularly the trees. I'd have to go back out and do a count of the trees and take a look at that. I don't know how many significant trees. There could be some pruning done of some of the trees to help reduce the potential of windrow knocking those trees over as a consideration. But, guess it's a potential. I guess I'd like to hear what their vegetation specialists, how they would answer that themselves, because there is that potential, I suppose, with only a 5-foot buffer left at the top of the bank. But I guess I'd like to hear the applicant's representative answer that question as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not a tree expert, so I can't talk about the trimming thing, but I'd like to explain the limit of work. So even where we're within the 5 feet of the coastal bank, that's the limit of work. So we still have, I think it's 3 feet for the erosion control, and then we're meeting, there's really no excavation right up against that limit of work. So it's not like at 5 feet we're digging down into the ground to disturb roots that might be right past that 5 feet. I think the closest excavation to the coastal bank would be at least 10 feet in for those. I think it's even greater than that, 10 to 15 feet in at the closest point for installation of a dry well. And then I just wanted to touch on the swale, and then I did do some modeling for the frozen ground conditions. So just to kind of reiterate the swale, for the 100-year storm, it's just the backyard. So we're just talking about 20 feet, 25 feet. So it's about from the back of the houses to the limit of work that this swale depression is capturing. It's a very small watershed, great sandy soils. If you remember, we had a conversation about how we determine the infiltration rate. We did actual in the field infiltrometer testing at, I think, 4 or 5 places along the site, and we took those rates. We took the lowest of those rates, which I believe the lowest one was like 45 inches an hour, which by the stormwater regs, a good infiltration rate is 5 to 8 inches an hour. For Title V, I mean, you can't even do a perk in this soil because you can't pour enough water in the hole to measure it. So we took the lowest, which, I mean, some of the higher ones were 120, 150 inches an hour. So we took the lowest of 45, then we halved that. So, I mean, at the most, conservative piece of the site, we're applying a factor of safety of 2. At some, we have a built-in factor of safety of 5. So I took that under normal, using that 20 inches an hour rate that the half of the lowest one we measured. We're talking 4 to 5 inches of ponding with the 100-year storm, which is 8.2 inches of rain. So that's a storm. I went back through the rainfall data for down here for the past 5 years, and the highest I saw was, I think, 4.1, so half of that. So under that condition, definitely there's, we've shown that, we've modeled that under those conditions, there would be no runoff over the coastal bank. And then what I did was I did some research on frozen ground, and I looked at the UNH Stormwater Center, and then I also looked at a study done in the 70s in Alberta, Canada, about stormwater runoff into frozen ground. And, from both of those, UNH does a lot of research on, especially the LID, the newer stormwater. You go up there, been to their facility, they have rain gardens, they have infiltration. They have basically every BMP in the stormwater handbook, and they've had them there for 20 years, and they monitor them, and they maintain them, and they look at what happens when they don't maintain them. So these people, they're like the experts on these type of treatment devices. And it's New Hampshire, they get freezing temperature, they monitor them in the winter. They haven't noted any major failings or underperformance of these in the winter conditions. The Canadian study got really scientific on how frozen, frost, changes infiltration rates. It really depends on the moisture content of the soil, and with sandy soils, you tend to have a lower moisture content because the siltier soils, clayey soils hold more of that moisture. Especially in the winter, things tend to be drier. So they showed that even under some of the most extreme conditions they had, it may slow infiltration rates. I think they had by like 60 to 70, right, to 60 or 70% of their rate. So what I did is I took our stormwater model, I halved all the infiltration rates against. I quartered them. So our model was run at 20 inches an hour. I went to 5, which 5 compared to the lowest one we measured was 45. A lot of them were around 100. So we're talking a factor of safety at least 10 to 20 times. And it still showed that those backyard swales would have an additional 2 or 3 inches of ponding. There was still no runoff over that coastal bank. So, that's kind of as far as I went with it. I think it's a pretty, conservative design from the start, and then when you build in those factors and you look at that, I couldn't really get it to overflow without totally taking out infiltration, which, from my research, just isn't a condition that, people have seen during the winter conditions. So, I don't know if any more questions on that.
Thank you. We'll see. Does anybody else want to say something? Yes, sir. Please come on.
Good evening, Edward Jalwick, 54 Alma Road. Question through the board to the developer is, limit of work, is that as far as excavation will take place, or is that as far as vegetation and tree removal will take place? So the crux of the question becomes, are all existing trees, shrubs, brush from the limit of work to the property line, particularly to the north, to these banks that are imperiled and in question, how much of that vegetation will survive, or will it all be gone right up to the property line?
So the limit of work at the minimum spots is 2 feet off the property line, and then we allowed for 3 feet for the state hay bales, and within the coastal buffer we have a silt fence and state hay bales, and then at all points at least a couple feet back from that is where the limit of grading would be. So the installation, those hay bales and silt fence go in before you clear, unless there's something in the way. But
maybe you could simply say there's nothing goes on beyond the limit of work.
Except
Absolutely
no
nothing.
touch
Nothing gets
beyond the
cut,
limit of work, and then
no
we have a couple
vehicles,
feet
no
buffer
nothing.
of just the presence of the hay bales and everything, that nothing can go on. So, like we said, at that point, that's inside those hay bales is where there's tree and brush removal, but there's no. It's not like that's the limit of, that's the basement right there. The basements are set back at least another 15 to 20 feet for any deep excavation. And then the dry wells are, about, I think it was 12 to 15 feet, 10 to 15 feet off that, almost like interior limit of work, if that's what you're looking for.
But it sounds like you may be removing some vegetation for the placement of the limit of the work.
Yes, so within, that 2 foot off the property line at that point, where we're putting that entrenched silt fence for the turtle containment there.
Right.
You know, be some removal to get that entrenched in, yeah.
If I could just, keep a second, well, that's
Could
a
you,
question.
could you just,
Randy
I
Lilly.
did, thank you.
Randy Lilly, yes, if we were gonna, clear cut it, I mean, at the back of the property where it, merges into the coastal bank, we're gonna, if there are mature trees there, we're gonna try to save everything we can. There's no excavation, up to the limit of work. In fact, we're matching the existing grades. So brush, we're gonna clear it, but if there are, nice mature trees, we're gonna save them, because we're not doing any excavation there anyway.
Thank you.
Brian Madden from LEC. And I would just also point out that the way that silt fence will be installed, it will be installed with a ditch witch. So you're not clear cutting before you're installing that trench. You'll navigate around any vegetation as it can, and then you just simply place in the hay bales with maybe just cleaning out the brush on the liminal work side.
Mark?
Can you clarify? I don't know if you want to go digging any trenches.
Well, do you know what a ditch witch is?
Well, I've seen them used to put pipes this deep, and you don't want to do that.
Well, it just basically cuts a sleeve that's maybe about 2-3 inches wide.
But how deep?
It can get up to 6 inches.
How far?
6 inches.
6 inches, okay, so you're not going so far into the root zone that trees will
No,
start.
no, you're basically just so you can sleeve that silt fence.
6 inches.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question?
I think if I understand it right, so those mature trees and shrubbery that's holding the bank together, especially by Lot 1 and Lot 11, because there are literally dozens of 1 foot or larger caliper trees along that bank. And that is the prime concern that I've had, and some of the other folks that have spoken, that if you remove the trees right up to that point, the next tree in towards the north, which is on the town land, is then vulnerable to wind and erosion damage. And that's what holds the bank together, that vegetation, that root system. So if the developer is stating that they are intending to leave those mature trees and vegetation intact, that certainly will help to hold things together. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Good evening, and I'm Sandy Stowe from 115 Lucerne and a butter. And first of all, I want to thank the board. I know this is volunteer work, and I really appreciate you making sure that all of us residents who want to speak have a chance to do that. It's not always the case, so I really appreciate that courtesy. And I thank you for the report on coastal banks. I am concerned with the trees too, and I thank the folks who have mentioned trees. There was a talk of 10 or 12 trees earlier. This is 5 acres, and there's a lot of mature trees on there. It takes a long time, probably hundreds of years, for the trees to get that big in Falmouth because of the salt air. So I know that I was happy to hear that we're not going to clear cut the entire 5 acres all the way up to the property line, because when that happens, certainly the drip line of a tree, the roots go out probably, who knows, 20 feet depending. I'm not a tree expert, but certainly they are all interconnected, and when you cut down with the bulldozer to pull the roots out, you're going to impact the trees on my property too. So I'm glad to hear that you're going to try to leave the mature trees. There's in particular a tree that I call a witness oak right on our property line. It's about 5 feet over on your property line, the developer's property line. That's probably a few hundred years old. And I would hate to see that come down, just because I can tell that their garage is going to be within a couple of feet of it. So I don't know how you really preserve a witness tree like that and put your house right on it. So I think that's going to be harder, easier said than done to keep those trees, because when I look at the density, it looks like very dense to me. If you look at any kind of a chart like the ones you showed, it's several times more dense than the surrounding area, so every tree is going to have to really come out. It sounds good to preserve those trees, but in reality, I was just there looking today, I have no idea how you're going to build, what you're going to build with the houses set so far back toward the coastal bank when they get easily pulled up towards the street there. Or that's number 12 and 13. And my recommendation would be eliminating 12 and 13 altogether, 11, 12, and 13, or maybe even 10, because it's on those coastal banks. That way you can preserve the trees. Otherwise, you got the trees you got the houses set back, shoved back as far as they can possibly get. You can't see the water anyway, trust me, I live there, it's like a jungle out there right now because it's so much vegetation and trees. So pulling them back up, I think, is a way to go. But I hope that there is a condition to keep the mature trees if that's possible. Regarding the report, the question or concern I've got on the report is that it is conditioned on everything going exactly as planned, and you're very clear about saying that in your report, that if everything's following for the drainage, then it should work, and we shouldn't have a problem with the erosion. But I wonder that during the construction, I don't know anything about how the town does construction, but would there be an on-site inspector? I know other entities that build have on-site inspectors to do quality assurance throughout the project, so you see that it's being done correct. Because once it's all done, you come back and you look and it's wrong, it's hard to remediate. But I would ask the town maybe to look at having an on-site full-time inspector. And also then when the HOA takes over, you're gonna have 28 homes right now, and they're gonna be responsible for maintaining this system. And I don't know what guarantee we residents have, because certainly the 40B and certainly the Conservation Committee and the Zoning Board, their mission statements are all talking about how this isn't to harm the abutters or anybody else who's already there. And I'm not sure what guarantees we're going to have on an HOA, especially if it's going to be affordable housing. How are they going to afford several $100s a month in association fees that are going to be needed to maintain a private road and the stormwater drainage maintenance? And I've been involved with a couple of HOAs, and I know how those can be very challenging. But I'm not sure I see the residents and the abutters getting the guarantees that this project is not going to impact us or the coastal banks that our lands, and our environment relies upon. So that's a concern I would have on the coastal bank and on the report rather. And I think that certainly if there was less density, I'm not sure why it has to be so dense, because that would provide the vegetation and the buffer, so to speak, that would help the runoff to have more permeable surface to mitigate some of that challenge, despite the conditions. Whether it's frozen or saturated ground, you'd have some more buffer, whereas right now, if I look at that, it looks like a lot of density. It looks like more than 40% to me. I'm not sure. I don't have the stats on that. But I would just say, in conclusion, it looks like the project is taking 5 acres of, mature forest and vernal pools and white cedar swamps and coastal banks and everything, and turning it into a really high-density urban development. It's just hard to imagine that 40B really intended that when there's got to be places where the trees are already gone, where you could achieve all the effects you're trying to achieve, and it's only 7 affordable homes at the end of the day. So it's kind of like, for someone like me, a casual observer, I just don't see the sense in it. Maybe there's, I'm not sure that law always has sense to it, but I do think that to provide some common sense outcomes, a less dense project where maybe you look at lots 10, 11, 12, and 13, which are on the coastal banks, prohibiting removing the trees within 10 feet of a setback maybe, because right now, if you're moving trees all the way within 2 feet, you're going to definitely be cutting the roots of the trees on the property of the other people, depending on what the removal entails. But I think some thoughts like that might be ways to mitigate some of the potential impact down the road on this. Thank you very much for hearing me out.
Certainly, thank you. Anyone else? Courtney.
Again, in a broad sense, this project's been well thought out in many respects. The concern I have, which is similar to those of the neighbors, is the density of it. And I see it almost akin to a condominium in its density. And what concerns me, and has concerned me all through this project, and I've mentioned it before, and I'm going to mention it again, is that I think that the responsibility for stormwater management, in particular roof runoff and things of that sort, should be really the responsibility of the homeowners association rather than the individual property owners. Because there'll be a better chance of control. I mean, the systems have been designed to work. But once the systems, dry wells clog up and fail, you're asking a homeowner who, for one reason or another, when that problem occurs, is short of cash, it's a low priority, and so it overflows and doesn't work, and that defeats the purpose. So I'd like to see that consolidated in. I think it just becomes the responsibility of the homeowners association, however they want to administer it. But at least there's one body that we can go and put the hammer to if it's an issue. The other thing about the limit of work, I hear the idea of clearing brush before we, but saving mature trees before we put the physical limit of work down. And that kind of troubles me. I mean, a limit of work is supposed to be a limit of work. You don't do any work beyond that, whether it's clearing brush or cutting trees or modifying the landform or anything else. And I would like to see the limit of work put in place before any kind of clearing takes place. And I think that the Conservation Department should go out with the powers to be out there and walk the limit of work just to make sure that it's properly placed and there are trees that could be or should be saved or put on the right side of the limit of work and that kind of thing. And I think that's a way of addressing the reality of the thing, but it also addresses some of the concerns of the neighbors. And I think it'll make things go a lot smoother for everybody concerned. And I don't think it's a big concession for you guys to make. And those are my kind of general concept. I mean, the project is gonna go forward. We know that, and it's just a matter of making sure that the impacts of it are as can be minimized to the extent that they can be. And those are the kinds of things that I'm suggesting are what I'm seeing can be done. Well, and I would hope you guys in the same spirit would look at that as, particularly the idea of all the stormwater management being the association's ultimate responsibility. I have nothing else to say.
You can put a motion on the table.
I'll put a motion on the table to close the hearing and take it under advisement.
Second.
Thank you.
So that is still comment, I guess we can take from the audience or anybody else.
Yeah. We haven't voted.
I don't know.
Anything else from the board? You're not on the quorum. We usually don't have people.
But I could talk as a resident.
It's not our practice to do that.
Okay.
I'm sorry. It's not that it can't be done, but we don't do it, and I don't like introducing things on the spot like that. So, sorry, Peter. Yes, Jim?
I was trying to say something similar to what Courtney said at the same time. The limit of work is very close. The performance standard is no adverse impact to the stability of the bank. The limit of work is very close. So there are areas where the limit of work could be moved slightly. If it is their practice to not clear all the way to the limit of work, if they're saying you're going to leave a few more feet, then why not move the limit of work back a little bit? If the staff went out there and saw significant trees, I thought the idea of removing all the trees and then having a significant storm, windstorm, rainstorm combined, that there could be a potential impact, some impact at some area of the bank, particularly up by where it's a 2-to-1 slope. So up at Coastal Bank 2 on the Little Pond side, there is an opportunity to move that limit of work landward. You could move building number 10 slightly landward. So there are opportunities to move that little landward and protect the vulnerable areas. And I think that's a matter of the staff going out there. And as you said, pick the large trees that are landward of the limit of work and just mark them and say, you know, if they cannot, if they don't have to be removed, don't remove them, and therefore you're just adding a little bit more security to the no adverse impact of the stability of the bank. So there's a little, I think there's a little flexibility to move the limited work in certain places, and I think that's a discussion that needs to take place in the field.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. Anything else? Yes.
I addressed it.
No? No need.
Earlier I was referring to Jim, but just a couple of things in reviewing the Chapter 40B legislation, and I've written a letter about this 2 months ago. A couple of key points that are required to make it consistent with local regulations. One is that it promote better site and building design in relation to the surroundings. And I guess I'll go back to the fact that this project is so dense, and the current environment is a forest, a mature growth forest, which is being eliminated, that it doesn't, to me, promote a better site and building design in relation to surroundings. The neighbors are on 10,000 square foot lots at least. You know, so when you look at the number of homes along Alma Road, there's a total of maybe 5 or 6 to the end of the road, and we're looking at putting in, you know, 10 behind them, right abutting up to the edge. The other part of the law talks about protecting the health and safety of the residents of the town. So I think that there, again, to me still, you know, we keep glossing over this, but after the storms this winter, this is just recent history. If you go up Worcester Court, there were 16 big trees that went over because the ground was disrupted with construction that went too close to the root systems.
There were, on the Falmouth Public Golf Course, there were 9 very large trees that went over, and there's, you know,
Right.
it's not entirely clear to me that the work was the cause.
Well, but I think the point being that now you have hundreds of trees right next to each other. They didn't grow up independently. The root systems are interconnected. They didn't stand alone with a border around them so that they could buffet the wind, or they would have gone over. When all that's taken away, you've got a wall of trees right behind the abutters, because the properties are so close in terms of what's going to be cut out, that I feel, and we all saw this, that if there's wind and rain, you're going to have trees falling. And I think that there is a peril to the safety of not only the new residents, but the abutters. So, I mean, I think that it makes sense to look at the trees, to see where the edge of this development is going to go, and then to identify the risk. Because I had a tree fall from my property in a windstorm under my neighbor's car, and that person's insurance was responsible for paying for that damage.
Mm-hmm.
I gave her the deductible because I thought it was ridiculous that my tree went over and ruined her new car. But, you know, it's just a point to be said that we've got 90-year-old people that are abutters that don't even make the meeting because they can't get here. I don't know what kind of resources they have. You know, will there be a bond required on the association to protect the abutters? You know, and not only that, it's not just the abutters, it's like these neighbors, these new neighbors who are not going to be there in the winter. If they're, you know, 7 homes, yes, you'll have permanent residents for the affordable homes. They're probably likely to be here. But these other people will clear out from their summer home and go home, and they're not cleaning their gutters. And I don't know what dry walls are fine, but it really requires that the gutters be cleaned. And we all know what happens when the leaves build up and they freeze. The water doesn't go into the dry wells, does it? When I look out my window, if I haven't cleaned the gutters and we had an early frost, it goes right over the gutter. You know, so I mean, there's a lot of issues. I know that it's all well-intended, but the point is that these well-intentions are all left with us to deal with 5 years from now. So we can't just think about during construction, immediately following construction, in the perfect world. We have to allow for contingencies, and again, it gets back to the density, I think, primarily. So I don't feel like we really discussed at any point along the way through zoning or conservation, does this make sense? You know, again, according to the law, to promote better site and building design in relation to surroundings, which I don't think it does, because it's putting a California-style development into Falmouth Heights. There's nothing like it in our neighborhood anywhere in terms of density. So, and then protecting safety and not even considering potential chemical impact on the environment from all these new homes, which we brought up before. So, thank you. Just wanted to bring that up again.
Yes, sir.
Mike Hatch, 64 Elmer Road, quick and painless. I've had the pleasure of appearing before several boards, not in the town of Falmouth, but other boards a little north of here. And I just wanted to thank each and every one of you as board members for your volunteer time, and particularly with this issue. I think we're in our fourth hearing.
I think that's right.
There's been a lot of information
It's
to
not less than
digest.
that.
There's been a lot of information to digest, and you know, a lot of different opinions on different things. And in the end, while I may not necessarily agree with each member's opinion on a specific issue, I am leaving this last hearing knowing that I was heard and knowing that this board took to great levels, gathering all the information necessary to make the right decision. And as a taxpayer, that's the most I could have ever asked for this board. So again, I thank you for your attention from start to finish.
Thank you, that's very much appreciated. And there is, you know, we closed the hearing and there still is deliberation. So you've been heard and there's a lot to consider. Anyone else? All right. All those in favor of closing the hearing, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Kevin, are you voting?
Aye.
Thank you. Opposed? Unanimous. So moved. Thank you very much.
Just four of you.
The hearing's closed. Thank you. And
I
Jim,
had that
thank you
same
so much.
question a year ago or so, and I wanted to comment on something, and they say, oh no, you missed one of the meetings, you know, I mean, that doesn't make sense to me.
Because
Your ideas are just as good, but you can't vote on them. Why can't you opine?
the regular people
Right.
sitting over there can go,
Well, maybe the thought is that you missed a hearing, or whoever missed a hearing, he might have missed some input, and therefore
well, for,
his thoughts might not be completely informed, so they'd be confusing.
Thank you.
Yeah, this was,
My bottom line is, this is private property. These guys want to build out, let it go.
I would have to look at it.
We've worked
Thank
too
you
hard
again.
to try to minimize impacts on adjacent properties. That's good.
Fay Road.
no, we're
Worcester
talking,
Court, I'm sorry.
this hearing was not heard on 523.
It was heard when I was on, no, it was,
Okay, what do we got here? Fay Road.
Yeah, I think it was. It was the,
no, I was here for the last time.
I wasn't here.
May 23rd, no, it wasn't heard on May 23rd because.
No, it wasn't heard, it was continued.
Yeah, it was
Oh, it was
continued.
continued for the,
Yeah,
it was continued for Jim's
This one.
report, but we opened the hearing to talk about that. So,
but I think that was this day.
yes, we
'cause I
did.
was
We
here.
voted to have the.
But I was here.
not on the 23rd. I
Oh,
wasn't
okay.
here
If not on the 23rd, fine, but I
Yeah.
mean,
Oh, no, yeah.
Was it heard on the 29th?
the 23rd would, I mean, that's the Wednesday.
It was the Wednesday
The
I was.
16th, the 23rd, the 30th.
The 29th. Wasn't it?
I'll go back and look.
Well,
Was it?
Whenever the last hearing
29th
was,
was a
I
Tuesday.
was here and Steve and Jamie and I sat outside, and I don't think you were here.
Yes, I was. I was here. I wasn't here. I've been here for every Helmut Circle one.
Well, then I guess you were here. Okay.
I was here for 3 out of 4.
yeah, I know. I was sorry to eliminate you. And I think actually this is a question that we might want to
Consider.
consider.
How does that
And
work out? I mean, I understand
it's-
someone who hasn't been in all the meetings is not part of the quorum.
Right.
But can't they make,
I've talked to town council about this.
Yeah?
And it's kind of optional, but this is the way, since I've been on in 2007, we've handled it. So, and I'm perfectly open to changing it. I just don't like changing things on the spot.
How do we go about changing it? I think
I
it's
think we just
silly.
discuss it and come to a,
Well, we can discuss
Decision
it.
about
You
it.
have one more thing to vote tonight, guys.
Right.
You're not
Okay.
done.
you know, we could have done it earlier in the meeting, not in the middle of a hearing.
Oh, yeah, that's fine.
So, all right, thank you. Okay, so that's closed. Joan Foster, Chase Road has been continued to August 1, so we are up to our last item of business, which is to vote the order of conditions for 21 Fay Road.
I was not here for 21 Fay Road,
You
so-
were not, but I have something to say.
Good, Betsy.
May I start
Thank you.
the
Yes, you
discussion?
certainly may.
Okay, you were not here, but there was a discussion with the landscape architect or the landscaper about we can't have trees in this area because
Oh, yes.
bushes
cedars.
underneath won't grow.
Won't thrive, yeah.
Well, the fact is, there are plenty of plants that will thrive under trees. All you have to do is go out in the woods, and there's lots of understory. So I would like a condition that the trees be put on the other side of that path, and plants that are appropriate to be underneath trees be planted there.
I think that's
Agreed.
a very good suggestion.
What kind of trees? Cedars or?
Cedars or
Cedars, I
oaks.
think are fine.
Appropriate trees.
Yeah, and they can start, and the other issue, the other argument was that cedars aren't gonna live there. Well, if you have you know, if you.
Betsy, where are you talking about on the plan?
So,
Yeah, we've run into this issue before on other projects.
I mean, it's ridiculous. I wasn't gonna continue the argument, but there's
Yeah,
lots of
you're right.
understory.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
If you
Right.
put,
Plenty
if
of
you put a
options.
plant that likes to live in the sun, well, they're not gonna be happy underneath the tree.
So you're talking about where this brick walk is?
Yep.
Okay.
Here are all the trees.
Yeah.
They're removing trees from here.
Why? Okay, yeah, all right, yeah.
We won't get into that. So I want these trees to be distributed here, and I want this to be something that can deal with a shaded understory.
All right, so
Not, right now, they're supposed to be,
got
Yeah,
it.
There's a lot of stuff that'll grow on
Got it.
trees.
some kind of rose.
Ah, it's this area over here.
Virginia.
Yeah.
That they're gonna strip out.
Well,
Enough?
what are those?
She showed us a
Viburnums
couple
or
of
something?
very
Little shrubs.
attractive photos of what it would look like if
Oh,
we
oh.
gave her away.
Happening, well, we'll get to it.
Okay.
So
Got
that
it.
was that's my major comment on that project.
Okay.
So I'm glad I stayed.
I'm glad you stayed too.
Yeah, I don't think there was anything else particularly.
Yeah, I think there was something about inviting all of us down to stay for a while.
I think for a cocktail party.
For a cocktail
I think for a
party or
cocktail
some
party
such.
there.
It's, my God, what a beautiful
Yeah,
spot.
yeah.
It was.
There was a comment about a fence between the perennials and the
Oh.
lawn.
Yes, that was another comment.
Between the what?
The perennials and the
Oh,
lawn.
so there's a
Yes.
fence already there.
Yes,
And I said, can we
demarcation.
just can we move the fence out
Yes.
so the perennials don't get cut? And we were told, no, we can't, that fence is gonna stay because it has rock posts that make that
Yes.
fence. And I said, well, fine, it's fine with me if you wanna keep that fence, but there has to be some kind of permanent demarcation of the,
Right.
thanks, Peter, of, the edge of the,
The lawn
Right.
and
Yeah,
perennials.
between the
right.
lawn and the
No mowing
perennials.
beyond this point.
They're removing, part of it is they had to have less lawn, which was a requirement of a previous order.
Yeah, got it.
And then there was also a discussion as to what that would be, and we usually do the split rail fence. I don't care exactly what it is, but it has to be clear so the lawnmower doesn't go across it.
Okay.
Yeah, so more of those granite posts would be nice. That's up to them.
Yes.
Yeah,
Right.
but it has to be something that's acceptable.
Mark has something in here that says prior to any tree or shrub removal for construction or a hickey landscape shall schedule on-site meeting with staff to to incorporate changes into the native tree and shrub plan discussed during the notice of intent on site and through comments with the commission. That must be moving the trees. Some changes
Yeah.
include
Yeah.
reducing the width of the sweet fern, increasing the width of the Virginia rose to the north, decreasing the area of sweet fern to the south, and posting rail, okay, got it, all right. Okay.
Okay, I make a
Sounds
motion that we.
Second.
Accept the order as discussed.
All right. Don't even know what my motion was gonna be.
As discussion.
Okay,
Issue the order as discussed.
And I'll second.
Thank you. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous, so moved.
motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Unanimous, so moved. Thank you. Jen, maybe we can put this question about the quorum people.
Yep.
Under other business next time. Great. Sam, you have something to tell us about?
On this issue, well, this came up, I'm jet lagged, so my memory is.
That's okay, I can
But this
relate.
came up recently, and somebody proposed that in fact that if a person sitting on a regulatory board swears that they read the minutes of the previous hearings, that they would be allowed to vote
Yeah.
in such a situation.
Well, that's
We're not even
We're
talking
not
about
even
that.
getting there.
We're not even worried.
We're not going there.
We don't even comment. If we're not on the quorum,
It's
we don't
allowable. I agree with you, that's allowable, but
But I'm just saying that people are looking at this and saying, all right, that's voting, but now you're talking about commenting.
Right.
But at least you can say, you can only comment if you can testify to the fact that you've read the minutes and you've essentially gotten the gist of the information that's been presented in
Yeah.
previous hearings.
I don't even really
Well,
feel
yeah.
that strongly about that. You know, I think anybody, there's a good argument that anybody can comment.
But Sam brings up a good point.
Yes.
In that what happens sometimes is if you miss a couple of hearings, and then you're sitting in on a hearing and you go, hey, well, what about blah, 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 blah? And everybody who had been here has already gone through a half an hour discussion on that.
But, you know, I think the intent of not allowing people to weigh in is that you're not providing them with an opportunity to lobby for a particular
Exactly.
opinion or position.
Exactly.
When they haven't participated in all of the activities. And it's basically controlling the deliberation so it's fair and just to all.
Right, but it's still at the hearing phase. So I'm open to that, but,
We'll discuss it.
Yeah.
and unfortunately,
Can I-
you missed
can I
some
make
too.
an observation based on
You know,
that?
I feel like.
13 years on this
You
thing.
know, but I get nervous thinking about
I'll send the question
taking
to
advantage
Pat.
of that other thing if we get, you know, get into an appeal situation.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think, you know, this evolved, and part of the reason I think that we finally went to the point of saying, all right, if you're not on the quorum, you don't chip in on the discussion, or is that, was an attempt to try to streamline the process. Plus, as Betsy pointed out, if somebody's missed a lot of meetings, even if they read the minutes, they miss a lot of the essence of it, and so they may be asking questions that have already been gone over, and I think it streamlines things. And at the same time, we've been flexible enough on this, I think, any of the recent chairs, that, you know, if someone has something really important to say, and they've kind of just alerted the chair, you know, then they oftentimes will be allowed to say, you know, so it isn't like you're putting a hard muzzle on them.
But usually a continuance, if it's a continuous meeting, the point is that the presenter is bringing in new information. So I would hope that any comments that someone would have would be related to that new information, which wouldn't necessarily have to be predicated on having been there at a previous meeting.
Yeah, but if you're not on the quorum.
That's a good point. And
You-
I think also that I've been, you know, there have been numerous configurations of this board. I've been through a lot of them myself. And I don't anticipate a big problem with our current configuration getting, you know, going on and on forever.
Right.
But I can see where there were groups in the past where that was
Right.
always an issue.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
So anyway, we'll discuss it in public next week.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Sam.
Thanks, Sam.
I second this residence.
That was very nice of him to.
It was.
To say that.
But I think just as positive.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Good night.
Sam. We'll always take comments like that.